Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, and I'm honored to be having with me over the program for tonight is Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, the political analyst. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate, and happy Ramadan.
Thank you very much. Same to you.
Doctor, of course, we have seen over the past week and under the tenure of His Excellency President Abdel al-Sisi in general, we have seen closer relations between Egypt and Africa. In the past week alone, we have seen President al-Sisi receiving the head or the chairman of the Sudanese Sovereign Council, Transitional Council General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the President of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki. If we can start with the visit of the Sudanese leader, how do you see the importance of such a visit and the meeting that took place between the two African leaders?
Right, before discussing and examining that sort of very much important visit, actually, let's have a very little quick survey about the history of the African-Egyptian relations throughout more than 50 years ago. I mean, passing through three stages, actually. Perhaps the most distinctive one was during the late President Gamal Abdel Nasser, a sort of president and a tenure, actually, that, the sort of the Egyptian-African relation would assume pride of place,
yes,
reaching to the top of success, actually. Then, during the course of the late President Mohamed Anwar Sadat, for some reason or another, he was very much, intensely, as much as extensively preoccupied with solving internal problems and assuming the sort of the 6th of October war, stabilizing the sort of relations, international ones, I would say, with the United States of America, with the American administration, till you find actually with the coming and advent of late Mubarak, actually, all of a sudden, all the African relations with Egypt, they come to a halt, to a stoppage, actually, for a long period of time, actually, more than 20 years, because of the false attempt of the assassination of the late president, actually, at Addis Ababa, 1993. Leaving the Egyptian political scene and the, the consulatic ties, actually, with the African states, very much deteriorating to a great extent till the advent of His Own Excellency, Mr. President of Sisi, actually, to the tenure, to the political scene, starting to stabilize and reinform and rehabilitate, actually, the sort of the dead relations, actually, for quite a long period of time. That was to be crowned with his own advent, that is General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the Sudanese Supreme or Sovereign Transitional Council leader, actually, visiting Cairo last week, stating, his own first advent after his own assumption of that sort of very much distinctive political and presidential position, actually, holding very long, ties with Egypt, examining and discussing a large number of details, on top of which is the problematic situation of the Renaissance Dam, representing in the meantime his deep concern and his own deep interest in the meantime with solving and participating somehow or another to solve the problematic situation of Gaza Strip, the Palestinian cause in the meantime, and perhaps more often than not actually examining very much exclusively the sort of the extended war that lasted for quite some time. With Dekalo, Hamdan Dekalo, that is the leader of the rapid forces or the rapid deployment forces. In the meantime, examining the participation of the other parties, the international sites and agencies and organizations, such as the attempt of the American administration to send another envoy after the failure of the previous one, actually, to try to stabilize the situation in Sudan. But more importantly is the fact that behind the scene there are some hidden agendas, actually, of which our own dear President, Mr. Sisi, is quite aware of. And much the same way that, Al-Burhan is quite actually, in the meantime, aware of, which is behind the scenes there are international agendas. It seems to be on the first instance that the sort of the tussle, the struggle that does take place between, Fattah al-Burhan as representing the Sudanese army on the one hand, the national army outside, as at one side, and the other side is, Hamdan Dekalo representing the rapid forces and the You know, I mean, this is too outward seeming, but deep down there are, you know, I mean, hidden international forces that are trying every now and again to try to seize and utilize the chance and to leave Sudan to a greater period of time very much, you know, alienated from the Arab nation, quite not able to participate, living in that dilemma and quagmirish, you know, state of division or divide, I would say. Just by way of exploiting the minerals, the resources, the natural resources, the gold mines, the platinum, as much as the, you know, I mean, the animal resources and the animal treasure in the meantime, because Sudan for quite some time, as much as we all know, is very much widely known for being the world's largest grain basket,
yes,
quite able to solve all the food problems, despite the fact that at the heel of the Russian-Ukrainian war,
yes,
the whole world would seem to be quite, you know, I mean, blaming of the sort of the shortage of the food and the supply and the chains of supply and the devastation of the vessels that are carrying the grains to the Middle East and that sort of thing. Sudan, as in itself, as it really is quite able to individualize and to stabilize the solving of that sort of problem. And that's why the Western world and the imperialistic colonial outlook is quite utilizing that sort of thing just by way of protracting and extended the period of the tussle and the division in their own interests. We have got the United States of America on one side, we have got Russia at another, and even China as well. All these superpowers are trying in somehow or another to try to penetrate within the African continent through Sudanese problematic situation and harping every now and again to try to exploit and to increase fuel actually to the whole situation just by way of achieving their own materialistic ends at the end of the day. That's why, I mean, the sort of the meeting that was to be held actually during the course of the last week between, you know, His Excellency Mr. President of Sisi at one hand and Colonel, you know, Abdel al-Burhan is very much important, and the timing itself very much crucial. It seems to be quite crucial. And so far as, you know, I mean, the whole world at this particular situation would seem to be quite a turmoil. Gaza there, the sort of the division which is still there between Russia and Ukraine, and the shortage of food and the lack of the grains and the problematic situation of the Red Sea, which is at the top of the interests of almost all the presidents of almost all the world. This particular territorial place that seems to be quite controlling perhaps the whole world, either through the nets, through the weapons, through the maritime navigation, actually, that was during the course of the last 2 weeks since the onslaught of the Israeli troops on Gaza Strip, actually, and the devastation and bombardment, and their own false attempt to relocate the Gazas, actually, out of their own native spot, out of their own native land. The fact remains that the Red Sea area seems to be quite occupying pride of place and very much a strategic importance, actually, for the Western world. You know, I mean, I would really endorse the fact that the sort of the summit and the sort of the meeting between the two presidents would seem to be at this particular stage, you know, harping on and on towards the solving of that dilemma, of that very much a quagmirish situation, actually. And in the meantime, it's one way or another that would prepare for solving the sort of the attack on the ships and the vessels passing and crossing the Red Sea, and in the meantime, the sort of the thing that would be in our own interest. Insofar as we as Egyptians, we seem to be quite very much influenced and badly, you know, I mean, influenced, I would say, because of the crossing and the passing of the international ships and vessels through the Cape of the Good Hope, instead of passing through, as it was to be destined for them, through the Suez Canal.
Yes.
Thus losing millions and millions of dollars, the sort that would add and would maximize the shortage of the dollar in Egypt. That's why the meeting as it stands is very much important, very much crucial. And I think that General Abdel al-Burhan is quite knowing to a greater extent the sort of the role that had been played by Egypt throughout the previous chairmanship of the African Union, the participation of the Egyptian presidency, actually, to try to put an end for, you know, the adjacent troubles of adjacent African countries, the Horn of the Cape, of the whole of the African countries actually,
Yes.
that would besiege and would surround and would add fuel actually to the problem and the sort of the, you know, the very much dire war and struggle between Dekalo and between, Fattah al-Burhan. That's why, as it stands at this particular stage of the international arena, as much as in the local situation, it seems to be quite very much important and adding very much negative steps towards the solving of the problem, particularly, as I've just said, by the interference of the American administration by sending a new envoy to Sudan to try to stabilize the situation, to put an end for that sort of war that in no interest, that to no avail actually would seem to be adding poverty and impoverishment for the Sudanese people, despite the fact that, as I've just said, it seemed to be one of the richest among almost all the whole African countries, so to speak.
Yes, on the other hand, we have seen also another important meeting by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and his Eritrean counterpart Isaias Afwerki, which focused on the Horn of Africa and the situation in Somalia as well. How do you see the importance of the Egyptian-Eritrean relations under the tenure of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and how do you think they would be developed under this tenure?
One of the best relations, actually, being an African state, as much as any other individual African state is, but perhaps most distinctive one indeed among all other African countries because of geographical existence, because of geopolitical necessity, because of the strategic relationship and the very much bilateral, cultural, as much as strategic relations. In the past, as a South African, the president, the Eritrean president, perhaps is very much interested in the Egyptian affair, state of affair, I would say. And this is to be clearly testified by his own previous 6 visits in 10 years throughout the tenure of His Excellency, Mr. President al-Sisi, sort of a thing that would testify and clarify and give us a clear example of how important the sort of the strategic relation between the two countries is, or was in the past and is, and would be actually in the future, insofar as, it is to be very much developed, and so far as to be what you might call a strategic partnership rather than just mere single individual relations between two different individual African countries. The importance of Eritrea.
Yes.
The geographical necessity actually would stem out from the fact that it besieges and overlooks the Red Sea. More than 1,200 kilometers actually of its own coastal line would seem to be very much besieging the Red Sea, the turmoil point, I would say, they really insist on saying that it's on hot beds and it's very much, on fire. And as such, it would, in somehow or another, give us a clear indication of how Eritrea would seem to be very much able to participate in solving and putting an end for the Sudanese problem. Because, part of its own borderland and border line is very much besieging Ethiopia.
Yes.
In much the same way that other part of it is overlooking Sudan. And in the meantime, Somalia, in memorandum understanding between itself on the one hand and between Ethiopia is very much, I would really describe it as halting the steps towards the international peace.
Yes.
But we are quite aware of that because Egypt, represented by the presidential authority during the last July, that held the Sudanese neighboring summit, despite the fact that it seems to be quite very much not able to achieve its own goals and targets. But I would really say that during the course of the next few weeks, there is another inauguration on the part of the presidential authority that would, pave the way for almost all the peaceful settlements of these tussling countries. What seems to be quite very much interesting is the endorsement on the part of General Fattah al-Burhan on the one hand, as much as Isaias Afwerki, the Eritrean president on the other, their own clear endorsement and their own expression that Egypt is always there, participating in almost all the individual affairs, as much as helping all these African states in their own revolutionary attempts to try to be emancipated from the colonial as much as the superpower and the superimposition of the superpowers on their own territorial lands, and their own wide and clear and widespread declaration in the meantime of how Egypt is tackling the strategic as much as the peaceful routes rather than military actions or interference within the affairs of all other African countries. A clear testimony to the fact that the wide expression on the part of the international superpowers as much as the local arena, that Egypt is there almost for the peaceful interferences only, without imposing or fortifying or representing any military action or military step towards putting an end for any sort of tussle or a struggle between one individual state and another. I think that in the meantime, side by side, that's as you said, with General Abdel al-Burhan reaching Egypt at this particular stage is a clear testimony in the meantime to how the Egyptian presidency is accepting the National Sudanese Liberation Army as the only peaceful site to negotiate with. Apart from any other militants and militant groups and militias actually that are tussling and struggling to exploit both Eritrea as much as Sudan. I think that Egypt is not playing that sort of role. It's almost there for peaceful means, as it was to be clearly represented by the previous advances on the part of the presidential authority to settle the struggle in Libya and to bring both Fatah and Hamas together at one hand, and to try to put an end for the reconstruction of Gaza Strip during the previous onslaughts of the Israeli troops. So, I think even Joe Biden, in his own previous visit to Egypt, immediately after the COP27, of which Egypt is playing a very much vital role to the African continent,
yes,
did represent, in the wide sense of the word, so publicly publicizing the role of Egypt and the importance of its own existence in almost any single individual negotiation. And not only, I would really say, in the Middle East, but perhaps in the whole of the Mediterranean arena and the international in the meantime.
Yes, Doctor, as well as the couple of meetings that we have dissected and discussed between President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the leaders from both Sudan and Eritrea, you've mentioned that there were countless visits made between the Egyptian president and a number of African countries under his tenure during the past decade. On the other hand, countless numbers of leaders from Africa as well have been visiting Egypt under the tenure of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. What does this say about the keenness of Egypt and the African countries on upgrading ties between Egypt and Africa?
Well, to a greater extent, not only during the chairmanship of the African Union, perhaps by his own advent, by his own very beginning tenure, in his own early first presidential tenure, as much as the second, Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi is quite keen of, the dangers that are very much besieging the African continent, quite aware of the international conspiracies and the maliciousness on the part of the imperialistic outlook of all these superpowers to try to exploit Africa. That's why he was striking a very good example of a very finance of diplomacy in dealing with almost all the the struggles, as much as pacifying the road towards the peaceful settlement, and in the meantime, the extensive source of journalism visits actually to almost all these African states, and the wide reception and the very much welcoming gestures on the part of almost all these African countries is also a striking example and a clear testimony to how Egypt is playing such a vital role in not only in the Middle East, but also in the African Union during the tenure, the chairmanship of Egypt to in the African Union, and immediately after, because despite the fact that the sort of the chairmanship of the African Union will pass to other states of African African countries, I would say, but the role of the Egyptian presidency is almost prominent, striking a very good example of how the soft diplomacy of the Egyptian diplomacy of the presidential authority is always there, being invited to put down and to calm and to stop and to end almost all the struggles. So, I mean, this will add to our own very good reputation in the Middle East and throughout the whole world of how, you know, Egypt, perhaps during the early years of late Gamal Abdel Nasser, and the very strong ties and the bilateral relations is to be very much maximized and rejuvenated and rehabilitated and to be re-existed again after a long period of stoppage, as I've just said at the very beginning of the episode. So all these striking master strokes and all these diplomatic journeys and very much successful trips with almost all these, you know, presidents of the African states at these particular stage, and very much, I would say, pivotal moments in the history of the African continent, would strike a very good example for almost all the words of how peaceful, you know, the role of the Egyptian presidency in the Middle East is, pacifying and settling and stopping all the you know, I mean, the struggles in the African states, and in the meantime adding to the role that is to be enhanced in the Arab League, because in more than one respect, during the previous perhaps 4 or 5 years, a large number of dilemmas did occur in the African continent, the coastal line, the shortage of food, and the sabotage and the sexual assaults on the Sudanese women, and the sort of the sabotage and the mass massacre deaths did occur not only in Sudan, but almost on a large number of African countries. And only the interference on peaceful routes and means and ways on the part of the presidential authority could stop and could bring it to a 0 point. That's why, you know, I mean, all the previous visits and the journeys and the diplomatic steps and the negative journeys that had been taken, and the decision taken that was to be decided on the part of the presidential authority was very much, as I've just said, giving and striking a clear example of the success and the widespread peaceful ways and means through the aid of which the Egyptian presidency would negotiate every now and again.
Yes, Doctor, allow me to be going to the other report of the daily debate for tonight, as we will be focusing on the economic aspect of the Egyptian-African relations, as Egypt is on top of Africa in terms of the foreign direct investments. We will be having more details regarding such a statistic in the upcoming report. Stay tuned.
Egypt secured the top spot in Africa in terms of the value of incoming foreign direct investments in 2023. Hossein Heba, CEO of Egypt's General Authority for Investment and Free Zones GAFI, made the announcement at the Business and Investment Forum in Beijing. During his address, Heba highlighted the various investment incentives that Egypt offers to foreign companies, with a particular focus on key industries such as automotive, home appliances, energy production, and green hydrogen. He also emphasized the benefits provided by Egypt's special and free economic zones, which aim to stimulate exports through tax exemptions, encouraging Chinese companies to increase investments in Egypt. Heba emphasized the promising opportunities that the country offers in this regard. He called upon Chinese businesses to capitalize on these prospects and strengthen bilateral economic ties. According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Egypt ranked first in North Africa for foreign direct investment inflows in 2022. Furthermore, a report by American global management consulting firm Kearney ranked Egypt 14th among the world's top attractive and trusted emerging markets for foreign investments, ahead of Turkey, Morocco, South Africa, and Russia.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, and I'm honored to be having with me in the studio for tonight Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, the political analyst. Thank you very much once again for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate. This time we will be focusing on the economic relations and the bilateral ties in terms of economy and trade between Egypt and Africa. How do you think they have been developed under the tenure of President Sisi, and what is next to be looking up for the next couple of years?
Well, apart from the political scene and the strategic ties and very much important partnership between Egypt on the one hand and a large number of African states, out of which Sudan and Eritrea are very much notable ones indeed, you can really anticipate the enhancement of the free trade zone and the minimization of the taxes that are to be left, or if not very much cleared among all the Arab and the African states. And this is one of the demands that Mr. President Fattah Sisi was calling every now and again in almost all the international summits by day one, or starting from day one of his own advent.
Yes.
Sorry. To the presidential scene in G7 and TICAD in Tokyo, and a large number of international summits. He was always calling for the emancipation of, and the liberation, let me say, so literally to speak, of the African states, of their own taxes, of their own loans, and representing and identifying, perhaps in COP27, it was to be very much successful summit in last November in 2022, and which did summon and call almost all the superpowers to represent their own point of view of minimization of the taxes, and underlying and representing that the African states are very much blameless ones indeed, that they are not very much participating in the pollution of the atmosphere, of the air, of the climate change, of the industrial revolutions actually that were to be devastating the European continent for quite a long period of time. That sort of era of which the West or the Western world is very much responsible for, not the African ones.
Yes.
This was the first clear indication and the first successful attempt on the part of an Arab, president to represent that sort of fact of which the West or even the Western world was trying to overlook every now and again. And as such, I think in the eyes of the West and the eyes of the superpowers, by the presidential tours, by the economic invitation, or the invitation of the economic liberation of almost all the African states, of very much relieving the debts and minimizing their own loans and representing their own blamelessness, actually, of being not a culprit, of not participating in any sort of climatic changes, the sort of the problem that would cause a great deal of hindrances actually for the Western world. I think that Egypt is very much successful throughout his own initiation, his own excellence, his initiation of tackling and of touching on the long overlooked problems and status quo of the African states from economic point of view, and a sort of a very much successful and integrative step to which the Western world and America is quite aware and very much ready to relieve the sort of the loans and the sort of the debt. And in the meantime, participating, building factors, and aiding the African states by enhancing every now and again the Silk Road and the Belt and the Road, a large number of initiations, and of building factories, and of solving the problem of the mass unemployment for almost a large number of the African people. A sort of a step that was to be hailed actually by General Fattah al-Burhan in his own previous visit, very much recent one indeed to Cairo. He did represent the fact that Egypt is very much welcoming not only the Sudanese people, but
yes,
the Syrians, the Libyans. More than 500,000 Sudanese students are very much coming readily.
As citizens.
Yeah, coming readily and very much peacefully, living among the Egyptians, as you might have said right now, as much as an indigenous citizens are. Not in camps, not in tents, not in poor and impoverished places, that they are highly educated in among the upper middle class people, living a sort of a very much decent sort of life, and in the meantime leading a sort of a life that is as much as an ordinary Egyptian citizen is. And this is a fact, I think, that the Western world wouldn't be able to overlook. And this is a clear testimony on the part of General Fattah al-Burhan, saying that the nearest spot and the nearest country, and the most kind one indeed, a most welcoming spot that is to be selected rather than rejected on the part of the Sudanese people after the attack of Hamdan Dikalo actually on the people in there, was Egypt. So it represented the first station and the most peaceful one indeed to be reached to, and the first initial step that we would have to think of.
Yes, and finally, Doctor, in the last couple of minutes that we have for the program for today, the African Continental Free Trade Area, how do you see such an ambitious project, and what is stopping us, what is stopping the Africans from implementing it fully?
Yeah, rightly so. The fact that you have got a great deal of impediments, as I've just said, that there are some steps on the part of His Own Excellency to tackle the sort of the problem by initiating and parading the impediments and the hindrances actually in tickets and G7, in Tokyo, in Germany, in Paris summit for the climate change that was in 2015. All these things were to be tackled and examined and represented, and a sort of a step of which Egypt is quite to negotiate, but the imperialistic outlook is always there. Hindrances on the part of the superpower, knowing the fact that once they would reach to a peaceful settlement for almost all these tussles and struggles, once the division is to be erased, once the alienation and the sense of isolation of all these indigenous people would seem to be quite, erased from their own road, they would seem to be the best nation among the rest of almost all the other nations. That's why impediments are always there, hindrances are to be harping on and on, despite the fact that, we would never falter. We would always be there, participating and aiding and stretching a helping hand, not only for the African states, but almost for all the world at large, even the Western one, a sort of a step that was to be represented by the previous dilemma of the corona, of which Egypt was very much, helping and aiding as much as stretching a helping hand for almost all those worlds and the superpower as well.
Yes, Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, the political analyst, thank you very much for being with us tonight on The Daily Debate.
My pleasure, sir.
Anytime. And this brings us to the end of The Daily Debate for tonight. Thank you for watching and goodbye.